They say you can't play games on Linux, that it's only for servers, programmers, or people who hate Windows. But what if I told you that Linux gaming didn't just survive, it evolved? From text adventures to 3D shooters, from obscure ports to the Steam Deck, this is the untold story of how a community of dreamers, hackers, and rebels turned a geek system into one of the most flexible gaming platforms on Earth. Get ready, because the real history of gaming on Linux is wilder, smarter, and far more revolutionary than you think. Back in the 90s, talking about video games on Linux was almost a joke. The system was still young, often lacked any graphical interface, and was mostly the domain of hardcore tinkerers and server enthusiasts. And yet, even in those very early days of the Penguin, games did exist. They were just different from what we know today. Take the earliest distributions, for example. Slackware 1.0, back in 1993, already included NetHack, Tetris, Rogue, and other text-based games. For many users, getting one of these games to run was a true rite of passage. Linus Torvalds himself in the old mailing lists often mentions games like Tetris and Snake as some of the very first to run on the new Linux kernel. One of his famous lines when he finally managed to get NetHack working was, "Yes, I got NetHack to run, now it feels like a real OS." As if to say, an operating system without games just isn't complete. And then there was the big question of graphical games. With the spread of the X Windows system between 1992 and 1993, the first true graphical games appeared, often written by enthusiasts and indie developers. X-Bill, 1994. This game quickly became a cult hit among nerds. It was an anti-Microsoft game where you had to stop the character Bill, an obvious nod to Bill Gates, from infecting computers with Windows. Created by Brian Wellington and Matias Duarte, it was installed by default on many distros for years. X-Tetris, the Tetris version for X11, present since the early 90s, was often seen as one of the proofs of life for a working Linux graphical environment. X-Scavenger, one of the first 2D platformers for Linux X11, with gameplay similar to LoadRunner, also fully open source. But the open source classics are what truly created the mythology of gaming on Linux. Tux Racer, developed in 2000 by Jasmine Patry as a university project at MIT, it quickly became one of the most iconic Linux games ever. The wild slides of Tux the Penguin on ice tracks were simple, fun, and most importantly, ran on almost any PC of the era. It was the go-to game everyone would install to show friends that you really can play games on Linux. Frozen Bubble, created in 2002 by Guillaume Cotenceau, it was one of the first open-source games to achieve worldwide popularity, thanks to its simple yet addictive gameplay. The soundtrack, composed by Matthias Lebidan, became a cult classic, and the game spawned dozens of ports and remakes. Battle for Wesnoth, this turn-based strategy game began in 2003 from an idea by David White. Initially made for fun, as an open-source alternative to commercial strategy games, today it's maintained by a huge international community, with translations, expansions, and official tournaments. Super Tux Kart, another legendary open-source title, born in 2007 as an evolution of Tux Kart from 2000. Over time, the community improved the graphics and gameplay, transforming it from a simple Mario Kart clone into a real benchmark for racing games on Linux. In the README files of many early Linux distributions, 1992 to 1993, the presence of text games was even a point of pride. It was a way to show that the system was more human, not just for techies. Many of these games, like NetHack and Rogue, have deep roots in the Unix world of the 70s and 80s, and were ported to Linux almost immediately, precisely to keep alive that spirit of challenge and discovery. A little trivia. One of the very first text adventures, Colossal Cave Adventure, 1976, written by Will Crowther and Don Woods, was already available for Linux in the 90s. Often used as a demo to show off what the terminal could do. For many, playing Rogue or NetHack was more than a pastime. It was a real baptism as a Unix Linux user. On the mailing lists of 1992 to 1993, discussions about how to get these games working were a daily occurrence. There were even users who installed X11 just to see if they could run X-Tetris or X-Bill, the legendary US games directory. Even today, if you type LRV game on Linux, you'll often find a long list of titles: Snake, Tetris, Othello, Hangman, Gomoku, real vintage gems that have accompanied generations of nerds. But the surprises didn't stop there. The first real FPS on Linux was probably Doom, ported in 1994-95 thanks to Loki Software's release of the source code, one of the most revolutionary moves in open source gaming history. Soon after, other cult classics like Quake and Quake 3 Arena followed the same path, proving that even major developers were starting to look at Linux with respect. Among the very first AAA games to be released with a Linux version simultaneously with Windows, thanks to the work of Ryan C. Gordon, Iculus. The commercial CD already contained the Linux binaries, or you could download them from the official website. A rare case, still fondly remembered by many to this day. But the real revolution of those early days came with Loki Software. Founded in 1998 by Scott Draker, Loki was the first company to truly believe in the potential of commercial gaming on Linux. Between 1999 and 2002, they brought titles like Civilization Call to Power, SimCity 3000, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, Railroad Tycoon 2, and many others to the Penguin's domain. Unfortunately, Loki ultimately went under for financial reasons, but their legacy lives on in essential tools like the SDL libraries, which today form the technical backbone of thousands of games across all platforms. Meanwhile, the most hardcore users ventured into the magical world of Wine. Countless hours spent trying to get Windows games running, endless crashes, forum guides, different versions, improbable patches. Every little victory was an epic achievement, worthy of being celebrated on IRC channels or in community chats. Playing games on Linux at the time wasn't just a technical challenge, it was an act of faith and pure passion. After Loki's demise, for many the future seemed bleak. Few native games, software companies ignoring Linux, and a community split between optimism and resignation. This was the dark decade of Linux gaming, dominated by small indie projects, ports of old titles, and above all, a never-ending struggle to make games run through Wine or various emulators. But during those very years, one of the market's most revolutionary ideas was born: Humble Bundle. Pay what you want, get a selection of indie games, and incredibly, many are natively available for Linux. The success of Humble Bundle showed that there was an audience eager to support Linux games, and that developers, if given incentive, could choose multi-platform releases as the default path. For the first time, having a Linux version became a competitive advantage for small studios. And then, the earthquake hit. In 2012, Valve announced the launch of Steam on Linux. For the community, it was a bombshell. The world's most famous gaming platform was finally opening its doors to the open-source operating system. It wasn't just about numbers or a store, it was about symbolism. Within a few months, Valve officially brought its most iconic games to Linux: Half-Life 2, Portal, Portal 2, Left 4 Dead 2, Team Fortress 2, proving to the world that Linux was no longer just a curiosity for techies, but a real platform for anyone seeking top-tier entertainment. And not only that, for months, after some of Valve's optimizations, Left 4 Dead 2 actually ran faster on Linux than on Windows. A paradox that spread across the internet and shattered more than a few prejudices. Once again, Valve showed its real commitment to Linux, investing in the development of drivers and technologies like OpenGL and later Vulkan. The arrival of Steam on Linux ushered in a new era. Suddenly, other AAA titles arrived like Civilization 5, The Witcher 2, Cities Skylines, Total War Shogun 2, along with a wave of cult indie hits such as FTL, Faster Than Light, Don't Starve, Terraria, Kerbal Space Program, Factorio, and many more, often with native or optimized support. For the first time, Linux users could buy and play dozens of modern games without crazy workarounds or hacks. But the real revolution was still to come. In 2018, Valve launched Proton, a compatibility layer built right into Steam that lets you play thousands of Windows titles on Linux with just a few clicks and incredible performance. Suddenly, all those old limitations came crashing down. You no longer had to be a tinkerer. Just install Steam and start playing. Over 75% of the most popular games on Steam became playable on Linux thanks to Proton, and the list grows every month. Once again, Valve stayed ahead of the curve. They created the Steam Machine, an early attempt at a Linux console, not too successful, and, years later, launched the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is a portable console based on Linux, SteamOS, able to run hundreds of AAA and indie games with impressive performance. For the first time, Linux became the foundation of a mainstream gaming platform for players all over the world. And for those who love retro gaming or graphic adventures, on Linux you have tools like ScumVM, which lets you replay all the classic LucasArts and Sierra adventures, and DOSBox, the go-to emulator for reliving or discovering the golden age of DOS games. Thanks to these projects, the video game heritage of the 80s and 90s is always accessible on Linux, often with surprising ease. So, in just a few years, Linux went from being a system for the few to a true alternative for modern gaming, without ever forgetting its open-source roots or its passion for retro gaming. Today, the landscape has completely changed. The Linux ecosystem is more user-friendly than ever, thanks to projects like Lutris, a universal launcher that lets you manage native games, Windows titles, emulators, and cloud platforms from a single intuitive interface. Technologies like Flatpak and AppImage have made it incredibly easy to install games without worrying about dependencies or compatibility with your particular distro. Alternative stores like Epic Games Store and GOG now frequently offer cross-platform titles, and the community produces patches and scripts to make more and more games playable on Linux. But the real game changer is cloud gaming. Platforms like GeForce Now, Xbox Cloud Gaming, and even Stadia, while it lasted, have made it possible to play AAA titles on any Linux device without worrying about your hardware. Today, anyone who wants to play on Linux has more options than ever, almost all of them plug and play. Of course, it's not all perfect. Many games still use DRM or protection systems that aren't compatible with Linux or Proton, creating a few obstacles. Online titles like Fortnite use anti-cheat systems that often block Linux players, even when the game could technically run. Not all hardware manufacturers support Linux as thoroughly as Windows, so you might still run into a few issues. And there will always be some niche games or brand new software that arrive on Linux with a bit of a delay. But what does the future hold? The path is clear. Cloud gaming continues to evolve, Proton is constantly updated, and the community works tirelessly on patches, ports, mods, and innovative tools. One important development is Wayland, the new graphics system that promises better performance and more advanced security. Platforms like Lutris keep expanding, including more and more games and making life easier for users. The best part? The Linux community is more active than ever, not just developers, but countless users who share guides, tips, reviews, and support on forums, Discord, Reddit, and Telegram. Every new game that arrives on Linux is a small victory celebrated by the whole community. So next time someone says, "You can't play games on Linux," you can smile and answer, "You mean you can't." Because Linux gaming is no longer a dream. It's reality, it's freedom, and it's growing faster than ever. What was the first game you played on Linux? Tell me in the comments, and if you've ever slid down icy hills with Tux Racer, you're already part of this story.